our first place, walking home with a whopping 250 BSV coins,
UptimeSV.
Woohoo! Congratulations.
UptimeSV is the Australian startup which won the CoinGeek hackathon earlier this year. Its idea is to allow businesses to check their online presence in different places on different devices and conduct other technical tests. To do that, Uptime will recruit an army of ordinary people who will allow their devices to be used for testing, and in return, they'll receive micropayments in Bitcoin SV. At the recent CoinGeek conference in Seoul, South Korea, I spoke to Dean Little from Uptime about the BSV ecosystem, how China is forging ahead in Bitcoin, and about his own amazing talent for languages.
You're listening to CoinGeek Conversations with Charles Miller.
So Dean, Uptime won the hackathon at the Toronto CoinGeek conference.
Yes.
How's it been going since then?
Oh, a lot of hard work, really. So for us, we're not just interested in building our business on this blockchain, but we're also looking at how we can build solutions to the problems that we've come up against in building on this chain, so that we can release those to other people, so that we can rapidly increase the value of our own investment. So we've been working on a lot of solutions to sort of the problems that we've come up against in terms of things like transaction management, identity, and address resolution, things like that. So we've been mostly focused on building the solutions that our business will be built on. And then in the past month and a half, we've been more focused on the business itself and getting it ready for our launch date.
Because that hackathon was intended to encourage people who were going to help onboard users to Bitcoin SV.
Yes.
It seems like you have hit upon something that could be a useful business in itself, and not just a sort of manipulative way of onboarding people. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. With Uptime testing, I guess the simplest way I could sell this as a usable business. If you're asking one of the big enterprise customers like Amazon or Tencent in China or Microsoft, is my website online or not? If they say your website is offline, it's probably offline. But if they say your website is online, it doesn't necessarily mean it's online to your end users, because they're using a very different type of architecture, hardware, software, DNS solutions to what your typical end user is running. And until this point in history, it's never been possible for me to send a very, very small fee to somebody to run a check like this. So consider trying to do something like that with PayPal. There'd be like 40 cents in fees to send you a 1 cent reward for checking if my website's online. So this data is much more valuable than what a big enterprise customer could actually give you. However, until this point in history, there's never been the money mobility to enable that to happen. So it's a very exciting place to be.
Right. So as I understand it, you're recruiting sort of the little guy to do the work, checking whether these sites are online, for instance, and they get paid a small amount of BSV for their services. What stage have you reached? Do you have a sort of population of those people, or is that still to come?
So we released our beta sign-up form about a month and a half, 2 months ago, and we received over 500 sign-ups for that. We're currently just finalizing some of the stuff on the server side before we invite those people to participate in the closed beta later in October. And after that, it's going to be a full release.
And I mean, sort of in a way, it should be an easy sell, because as a one of your testers, it's just sort of free money, basically, isn't it?
More or less. I mean, there are some considerations they may want to make. Like, for example, we also offer load time testing, right? Now, if someone had a 100 megabyte website that's very poorly optimized, they might not want to be doing that on mobile data. But because
they'd have to pay.
Right. But, at the same time, if that's what we're dealing with, if that's sort of problems that we come up against, we can price around that. So it's very much a market that has never existed, and therefore there's no way to really do price discovery other than just going out and doing it. But yeah, we definitely foresee that it's going to be very cost effective, and this data is going to be worth a lot more than in terms of business intelligence than what any of the big providers can actually give you, especially in terms of things like internet censorship, political stuff.
What you mean, so that you'll ask users in different places whether they can see something, is that right?
Right. So like recently in Australia, we've had certain websites blocked by ISPs. The same has happened in Hong Kong. The same happens whenever there's a political uprising somewhere where people are unhappy with their government shuts down the internet. So it's important for people to be able to sort of see what's going on. Like I fully support someone's right to to enact laws in their country, even if I disagree with them. But to do so without transparency is wrong.
So that, I mean, I can sort of see that potentially your customers for that kind of service might be governments who want to see whether censorship in another country is effective or what's happening.
Yeah, look at the trade war right now between the US and China, right? We know China censors the internet, but the US could just as easily be censoring the internet. How would China know, right? So I guess this whole thing is about transparency and honesty.
Right, so you're thinking in terms of the Chinese government might be a customer wanting to see what
I'm sure it'll go both ways. The point is to reveal the truth in the matter, as opposed to letting it all sort of happen behind closed doors and no one knows what's going on. If you're a business and every business these days is a global business, really. Like even if you're running a small store in your local neighborhood or whatever, you're importing things. If you're building something in your own country, you're exporting it to other countries. It's important that in times of this like geopolitical unrest, that you can have some kind of data, some sort of way of figuring out how your business is doing in this greater macro environment, and what's disrupting it.
Just going back to the sort of business model of that, that's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
I'm thinking that one rather sort of fortunate aspect of your business model is that you have this population of testers, but actually you don't have to pay them until a sort of job comes in that is a commission that they will get paid for. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. And I guess that's one of the benefits of this kind of payment model. You're not like locked in. You can come and go at any time. If you're not happy with it, you can go elsewhere. Whereas a lot of the other companies try to lock you into these contracts, and you don't know if you're going to be happy with the service or not. So it's very much you're only paying money when work is being done, and you're only getting paid when work is being done.
That seems very much sort of part of the Bitcoin philosophy.
Proof of work.
Yeah, exactly. Now, do you go along with the sort of other sort of idea that is associated with that sometimes, which is that Bitcoin businesses can be incredibly small and nimble, and if Uptime goes very well, it may still only have a staff of 4 or 5, but be a big and mature business?
Yeah, I think in terms of like business growth, I think inevitably, of course, it all comes down to a numbers game. You have to protect your bottom line. But I think if you're making money and you're doing well in this space, right? Why wouldn't you invest more to get more people in and create like feed into that network effect and grow the value of your investment?
So what would that be money to advertise for more people doing the tests, or what?
If I had to put on a salary and pay someone, a fair amount of money to go and onboard, 5 more big enterprise customers, the network effect that is created by that is greater than just those 5 customers worth of business.
Right. So you're looking at generating business from the people who pay you for the work, rather than improving your network of testing people?
I'm looking at both. I think that if you have a market where people can make free money on the internet, that they'll always go for it.
That's not a problem.
You know,
right?
That's not a problem.
Yeah.
And if it is, you just adjust your pricing model to meet their demands. But when it comes to what I'm getting at is, like, if you onboarded Google to your uptime testing service that's based on BSV, the effects of that for your company are beyond just the income that Google is paying you to do these tests, right? Because now this company is aware of this global, scalable platform that they can build their business on, and by doing so, they're increasing the value of your investment.
In BSV?
Yes.
Yeah. So that is, we were both at the boot camp in Bali, and
Yes.
one of the sort of themes there, I think, was that what's good for one BSV startup is good for all BSV startups.
Certainly, in the sense that it's friendly competition, right? Like, we do want to compete. We mostly want to compete with other types of businesses, but there is some internal competition as well. But it's friendly, right? Like, even if my business is outcompeted by someone who does it better than me, I still benefit as a holder of BSV.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, exactly. So it's friendly, not just because we're all nice people, but
No,
because there's an economic side to that.
Yes, it's in our rational self-interest to pursue it in such a fashion. Yeah.
Now, you're based in Australia, but you've lived in Hong Kong.
Yes.
Do you think that for those of us who are from Europe or from the United States, North America, have a slightly different view of the whole Bitcoin ecosystem? Is there a sort of Asian and Australian mentality around this business that is slightly different?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of things happening in the East that the West is not aware of. And I think more and more you're going to see these things coming out. All I can say is, like, learn Chinese. It's really amazing to see how quickly they're building things on this platform. You know, they're excited about it. They're really hardworking, and there's been some really creative stuff come out of some Chinese teams that I've been speaking to.
And you speak Mandarin, do you?
I speak Mandarin, Cantonese, and Hakka. They're the 3 Chinese dialects that I know.
Wow, how did you manage that?
I like languages. I don't know. I guess when you do business with people, you learn a couple of things to try and befriend them, and over time you learn a couple more little things, and like all of a sudden, I can speak this language. In fact, coming to Korea, it's the first time going to a country where I don't speak the language. Yes, my Korean is not very good. I can say, 안녕하세요. 내 이름은 Dean입니다. Like, hi, my name's Dean.
And you
호주 사람. I'm Australian. That's about it.
Well, did you just learn that between now
Yeah.
and yesterday evening when you arrived?
Yeah, on the plane. Yeah.
And could you read that, or is it just?
Yeah, I can read Korean. Korean's very easy to read. It's just it's very easy to read. In fact, the alphabet is much simpler than the Roman alphabet that we use for English. But speaking it is a very different kettle of fish.
Well, I think even with what you just said, you'll be doing well in restaurants and things.
Yeah.
And it's only day one.
Yeah. I learnt the most important one. It's 맥주 주세요. It's like, give me a beer. As an Australian, that's pretty important.
Just getting back to the whole development of BSV.
Yeah.
There's a huge emphasis at the moment on transactions on the blockchain. A year ago, that was much more of a sort of specialist interest, I think.
Yeah.
We were still talking about people using BSV to buy their beer in whatever language they were.
Right.
I mean, how do you see that debate now? I mean, is it have we gone too far in the direction of sort of forgetting about the sort of actual currency and money side of it, do you think?
So I think there's some very interesting arguments here, right? Like, some people will take one side and go, so you're rebuilding the internet on the blockchain. So, like, what does that have to do with peer-to-peer electronic cash, right? But if you actually, if you read Mises and all of these people,
Sorry, who?
Mises, one of the greatest Austrian economists, basically talked about praxeology and all of these things. But yeah, if you read Mises, he speaks about something known as the regression theorem, where currency cannot just be spawned out of a vacuum. It has to come from some kind of a use case. So if you look at like in World War II, like people would trade cigarettes instead of like paper money because they had utility. They were worth more. If you look at I can't remember, there was an African nation which basically ended up using phone credits instead of their national currency because it had utility. So I think when it comes to building a currency, if you want it to last, right, good money always drives out bad money. I think if you want your currency to last, it has to be based upon some kind of fundamental use case. Now that used to be a simpler way of storing gold, but if you look at history, every time in history that we went from gold to debasing that currency to something else, civilization eventually collapsed because we were pursuing unsustainable growth.
Right, so basically the idea is that a currency needs to be built on top of something that is actually worth something to people anyway.
Yes. Consider the concept of like exchange versus secondary exchange. So exchange being, if you really, really wanted my phone and I really, really wanted your baseball card, and you're like, I want your phone, I'm like, I want your baseball card. Oh, we could just swap, right? And that would be like the most convenient form of transacting, right? Which is an immediate exchange. In order for us to do this with a secondary exchange, having something in the middle, that something has to have a mutually recognized value, right? Now that value could be based upon utility. It could be based upon some kind of previous past value. For example, like gold has always appreciated in value over time, like over long enough time periods. So it can be past recognized value. It can be mutually recognized utility, or it can just be a mass delusion, right? As in, this is worth $1 because we believe this is $1, right? I think that utility becomes past value, past recognized value. And that's very much what the regression theorem is based upon. So if a currency has a use, it has a value. If something has a use, it could be used in terms of secondary exchange.
Right, so you're saying in a way that there is no absolute distinction between a currency and something that people value in its own right.
I mean, consider that what you value changes day to day, right? Right now you might value gold higher than water, but if you'd just been walking through the Sahara Desert for a week, maybe not.
Okay,
right?
but with that in mind,
yes.
Where does that leave us in the question of transactions as the way forward for BSV versus thinking of it as a currency?
I think the urgency towards transactions is very much an understanding that we're coming up to what people call the halvening. And so by increasing the amount of transactions on chain, we scale up the fee markets with the fee rewards with the size of the blocks, which means that it will be more attractive to miners. More people will mine the currency, and then that will increase the security of the currency and the hardness of the money itself. So I think it's coming from that sort of perspective.
But that sort of in a way is slightly separate from the question of whether the value of the system is in the transaction utility and the storage of data, or the storage of money, for want of a better word.
Yes, I think it's interesting. I think
could we almost forget BSV as money, do you think, and still have a successful system?
I think that anything that can be transacted virtually that has use and value is automatically subject to market forces, and therefore it can be used as a medium of exchange.
And so in a way, what, as you were saying with Uptime, the value of being able to make very, very small payments to people is in a way the unique thing that is going to make this system work.
Yeah, I think the
how's it been going since then?
You have the ability to value information on a very small scale, which that information is far more valuable than information that you can purchase on a large scale. but until now there's been no way to sort of value it as you're going.
And one of the sort of easy to understand examples of that is Twitch, where it's like Twitter, but if people like what you've posted, you get a little bit of payment for it. But it does change the system as well, doesn't it? Because when you put financial incentives into a system, direct financial incentives, it is going to change people's behavior.
Absolutely. I mean, people with useful information, they're going to earn money. That information itself is going to be valued. You're going to be able to measure this value.
I mean, it reminds me a little bit of the sort of the long tail question about the internet, where the great thing about selling books on Amazon, for instance, is that a very rare book wouldn't be available at your local bookshop, but that has an economic value on Amazon, because those small number of people have access to it there, and suddenly there's a market for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the point is there's a lot of information out there, but it's mostly noise.
So we're basically monetizing information.
We're monetizing useful information. Because useless information will not receive a monetary value. It might, subjectively, it might have value to someone, but there's a lot of crap out there, that no one cares about.
Right.
And we're currently, as they say, living in the information age. We've got data everywhere on like everything. Yes. The problem is like filtering out what we care about and what we don't.
So we talked a bit about the sort of theory and the economic theory behind BSV.
Yeah.
How do you see it in practical terms over the next year or two? Is the ordinary person going to be aware of this revolution taking place, or is the revolution going to be taking place?
Yeah, it's interesting. Personally, I think I focus on creating value. I think if you create a system that's valuable, to people like businesses, for example, I think that greater adoption comes about. Imagine if like Amazon were paying for all of their data services in BSV, right? And then all of a sudden they need to have BSV to be able to pay for these services. And then how do they get BSV? Well, they could just charge people in BSV, right? So I think a lot of it comes down to you're creating a market. You're building a market based upon valuable information.
I mean, I can sort of see a vision of how this could all work if everybody had adopted it. But there's a second question as to how we get from here to there, really, I think, isn't there?
Yes, I personally think the way forward is, create value. If you create something valuable, businesses will use it. If businesses use it, they'll need the currency as the medium of exchange to engage in these services. And that's where you'll see really widespread adoption.
There's a lot of development work going on in BSV, that's kind of obvious. But how long will it be before we can be absolutely sure that this is going to work, do you think?
Yeah, I think, look, it's been 10 years since Bitcoin has been invented. It's become a household name. Most people, they might not know what cryptocurrency or blockchain is, but most people have heard of Bitcoin now.
And don't have a very good impression.
Yes. I think that when we create something valuable, that we'll see the adoption come from that. And I think now the cat's out of the bag, right? This idea is not going to go away. It will, it's already working on some scale. The question is, can we scale up to meet the needs of these gigantic industries? And that's what this is all about. That's the whole reason why I'm bullish on this particular blockchain, because not only is it a continuation of what started 10 years ago, and someone's finally doing what the white paper said, it has the ability to scale to meet global demand for a plethora of different industries. I think it's only a matter of time, but I wouldn't define it in terms of how many years or how many months until it's obvious that it's going to work. I would say that I'd say that it's going to work in every use case where it makes sense for it to work, because it's going to be quicker, cheaper, more convenient. And in places where it isn't, well, maybe it'll take more time.
So in a way, that's a kind of optimistic message, because you're saying there's not a sort of ticking clock where it's either going to work or it collapses. You're saying we can evolve it slowly and step by step, really, and that will be sufficient.
I would say that every time someone creates a valuable application for the blockchain, for the BSV blockchain, you see value creation increase. And if value creation increases, forget about exchanges and all of these prices and whatever, because that's all really quite ridiculous. But when you're creating value, you're creating something people want, that people need to run their businesses, to live their lives, etc. Eventually I think adoption is inevitable if the solution is better than the existing ones out there.
Terrific. Thank you very much indeed, Dean.
Thank you.
Thanks.
It's been a pleasure.
Many thanks to Dean Little of UptimeSV, and I wish I could say that in Korean like he can, or even Australian. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.